I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you are standing right in the middle of a bustling, incredibly wealthy city.
Yeah, picture the absolute height of prosperity.
Right. The streets are thriving, the economy is just booming, and the absolute highest scientific authority in the land has just assured you, in writing, that you are completely fundamentally safe from the forces of nature.
A total guarantee.
Exactly. So you go to sleep believing that the ground beneath your feet is permanent, it's solid, and then just hours later, you watch as that entire city vanishes into the sea.
It sounds like a disaster movie.
It really does, but that isn't a hypothetical scenario. That was Galveston, Texas in September of 1900. And the craziest part isn't even the physical storm itself. It's the absolute wall of human arrogance that allowed it to happen.
It really is a terrifying piece of history to dive into because it fundamentally shatters the core assumption we all, walk around with every day.
Which is what?
Well, the assumption that the world as we know it, the actual physical ground we stand on, will still be there tomorrow morning.
Right, we take that completely for granted.
We do. And the physical storm, as monstrous as it was, only did the apocalyptic damage it did because a psychological storm of hubris basically paved the way for it.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the start, because there is one central figure we need to introduce for this deep dive to really understand that hubris. His name is Isaac Klein.
Yes, Isaac Klein.
We're going back to the year 1891. Isaac Klein is the chief of the U.S. Weather Bureau office down in Galveston.
And he's not some, old guard guy.
No, not at all. He's young, he's highly educated, and he's considered one of the brightest minds of this brand new generation of scientists who genuinely believe they have nature figured out.
They thought they had cracked the code.
Exactly. So he sits down one day to write an article for the local newspaper. There had been some low-level grumbling in town about whether Galveston needed to build a seawall.
Just some concerned citizens looking at the ocean.
Right. So Cullen writes this piece to basically settle the debate once and for all, and he essentially declares that the idea of a devastating storm wave hitting the city is an absurd delusion.
An absurd delusion.
Yeah, those are his exact words.
Yeah.
He actually writes that it is, quote, impossible for any cyclone to create a storm wave which could materially injure the city.
It's the absolute pinnacle of scientific arrogance. I mean, notice the language he uses there.
He doesn't leave any wiggle room.
None. He isn't just saying a catastrophic storm is statistically unlikely based on historical data, He's using the word impossible.
Right.
He is basically weaponizing his newly minted scientific authority to declare that nature has been tamed, or at least fully decoded, by modern man.
An absurd delusion. He puts that in print right in the newspaper of record for all the city's power brokers to read.
And they read it.
Oh, they read it. And the chilling irony here, the thing that sets the stakes for everything that follows in this deep dive, is that 9 years later, the sea would come to take his city, his home, and his own pregnant wife to prove him wrong.
It plays out exactly like a Greek tragedy right on the Texas coast.
It really does.
I mean, the man whose explicit taxpayer-funded job was to see the danger coming. The man who publicly mocked the very idea of that danger ends up at the absolute epicenter of the catastrophe.
It's unbelievable.
But to understand why his words carried so much weight, you really have to look at the environment he was speaking into.
Yeah.
He didn't just write that article in a vacuum, right? He wrote it for an audience that desperately wanted to hear exactly what he was saying.
Right, which makes you wonder, why was everyone so eager to buy into this illusion of safety? Let's talk about the city that bought the lie. Because if you're out there listening and picturing Galveston in the late 19th century as some, sleepy, rustic fishing village, you have the wrong image entirely.
Oh, completely wrong. Galveston, at its height in the 1890s, was this dazzling, hyper-capitalist boomtown.
The New York of the Gulf?
Well, that's what it was widely known as. It was an incredibly wealthy, fast-growing port city. It essentially controlled the entire cotton trade. Yeah, it had the first electric lights in Texas, the first telephones, this massive banking sector. In fact, by some historical accounts, Galveston actually boasted more millionaires per capita than any other city in America at that time.
Wait, really? More millionaires per capita than anywhere else?
Yeah, more than New York, more than Chicago.
That is insane. I mean, think about the swagger of a place like that. The sheer Gilded Age opulence of it all. You've got ships constantly coming and going, grand Victorian architecture going up left and right, a place that felt like it was the absolute center of the American future.
It was the place to be.
Right. And when you have that much wealth and that much forward momentum, the absolute last thing you want to hear is that you need to pause your economic engine, tax the wealthy, and build a giant, ugly wall to protect against some theoretical threat.
Precisely. Because wealth creates a very specific kind of insulation, or, at least the illusion of it.
The idea that money can protect you from anything.
Right. When a city is that successful, that dominant in its region, a kind of collective narcissism sets in at the municipal level.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
The narrative among the power brokers is entirely about growth. It's about progress, conquering the frontier. Nature is viewed merely as a resource to be extracted.
Or just a minor inconvenience to be engineered around.
Exactly.
But then you look at the physical geography of where they were building this massive empire, and the reality is absolutely terrifying. You have this immense, concentrated wealth, and it's built entirely on a sandbar in the Gulf of Mexico.
Literal sandbar.
A literal sandbar. The absolute highest point of the entire island was barely 9 feet above sea level. 9 feet.
And that was the highest peak. The average elevation across the island was closer to 4 or 5 feet.
That is so low.
It is a fatal geography. I mean, a barrier island is, by its geological definition, temporary.
Right.
It's essentially a speed bump made of sand, formed by ocean currents, facing the open expanse of a notoriously volatile body of water.
The Gulf of Mexico is not exactly known for being calm all the time.
No, not at all. And there was nothing between the city and the Gulf. No natural elevation, no rocky cliffs, and crucially, no seawall.
It's like building a solid gold mansion on a tightrope over a canyon. I mean, the structure is magnificent, it's glittering, it's the envy of everyone who sees it. But the foundation is literally a stiff breeze away from total tragedy.
Yeah.
So why would they build there in the first place?
Simply because of the deepwater port. It was the best natural harbor on the entire Texas coast.
So it was all about the money.
Economics dictated the location, and then economics dictated that they actively ignore the danger of the location. They valued the access to the shipping lanes far more than they feared the water itself.
And they had the opportunity to build a safety net. It wasn't like the idea of a seawall was completely alien to them.
Yeah.
Some of the nervous citizens actually looked out at that dark water, maybe remembered stories of past storms and said, hey, maybe we should build a seawall, just in case.
And this is where the intersection of economics and scientific hubris becomes so deadly.
Yep.
Because those nervous citizens had common sense and historical precedent on their side. But the business interests, the developers, the politicians, they had Isaac Klein on their side.
The man with the science.
Exactly. When Klein published that 1891 article, armed with the sheen of new, formalized scientific authority, he provided the exact intellectual cover the city's elites needed to kill the project.
Okay, let's unpack this. Why did a weatherman have veto power over municipal engineering? I mean, why did the politicians care what Isaac Klein thought about a seawall?
What's fascinating here is the era's overall mindset regarding science. In the late 19th century, humanity was experiencing this rapid, dizzying acceleration of technological progress.
Right, the Industrial Revolution is in full swing.
Exactly. They had telegraphs to communicate data instantly across continents. They had new barometric instruments. They had formalized government bureaus for the first time.
It must have felt like they were living in the future.
It did. And because of that, there was a genuine, pervasive belief that observation equated to control.
Huh?
Because they could track weather patterns on a map, they falsely assumed they had mastered the weather itself.
That is a massive leap in logic.
It is, but Klein wasn't necessarily acting out of, mustache-twirling malice. He was acting out of the profound arrogance of his era. He really believed his instruments and his theoretical models were superior to the chaotic, primal reality of the ocean.
It highlights such a timeless danger, honestly, the danger of weaponizing scientific authority to validate economic convenience.
Yes.
Because the seawall would have been staggeringly expensive. It would have disrupted the bustling port. It would have blocked the beautiful ocean views of the millionaires' mansions along the beach.
Can't have that.
Right. So when the chief meteorologist comes out and says, hey, you don't need it anyway, a storm wave is impossible, the politicians don't question the science. They applaud it.
They breathe a sigh of relief.
Exactly. They take the excuse, they kill the seawall proposal, and they just keep building.
It is a textbook example of confirmation bias on a municipal scale. They wanted to believe Galveston was safe because believing otherwise was economically inconvenient.
Yeah.
So they elevated the voice that told them exactly what they wanted to hear, and they silenced their own survival instincts.
But nature does not care about human economic convenience. Nature doesn't care about your per capita millionaires, and it certainly doesn't care about the U.S. Weather Bureau's official pronouncements in the local paper.
Not even a little bit.
Which brings us to the brewing reality of September 1900.
And this is where the story shifts from a localized tragedy of hubris to something much darker and honestly much broader.
Right.
A massive tragedy of institutional failure at the absolute highest levels of government.
Because the storm was already forming down in the tropics. And here is the fact from the historical records that is just utterly maddening to me.
Yeah.
The warning existed.
It was there.
This was not a completely invisible stealth storm that no human being could possibly have foreseen. Cuban meteorologists saw this monster coming.
Yes, they did. And we really need to dig into how incredible the Cuban meteorologists of this era actually were.
Please do.
Because they had vast, hard-won empirical experience tracking hurricanes. They lived right in the crucible of these storms. The Beeline Observatory in Havana was world-renowned at the time.
Wait, I need to stop you there. How are they tracking storms differently than the Americans? Weren't they all using the same barometers and instruments?
They had instruments, yes, but their methodology was fundamentally different.
How so?
Well, the Americans, who were relatively new to institutional forecasting, relied almost entirely on a network of telegraphs. If a station in Florida wired Washington and said, the pressure is dropping, Washington put a pin on a map.
Okay, that makes sense.
It does. But if the telegraph lines went down, or if the storm was over the open ocean where there obviously were no telegraphs, the Americans were essentially blind.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think of that.
Right. The Cubans, pioneered by figures like Father Benito Viñez, didn't just look at data points on a wire. They observed the physical environment.
Like looking at the sky.
Exactly. They study the high-altitude cirrus clouds that radiate outward from a hurricane center days in advance. They understood how to read the deep ocean swells that preceded a storm.
So they were reading nature itself, not just a telegraph tip.
Yes. They synthesized local observation with historical patterns. They understood the nuanced physical realities of how these tropical systems moved and intensified in a way the Americans simply didn't yet grasp.
That is absolutely fascinating. So the Cubans are looking at the sky and the ocean, and they know exactly what's brewing out there. They track this specific storm as it moves over Cuba, they analyze its trajectory, and they understand the grave threat it poses as it curves into the Gulf of Mexico, heading straight for the Texas coast.
Exactly. They knew it was a killer. But their warnings hit a massive bureaucratic brick wall in the United States.
Enter Willis Moore.
Yes, Willis Moore, the chief of the U.S. Weather Bureau up in Washington, D.C.
Right.
Moore held the Cuban forecasters in absolute contempt. He essentially enacted a complete top-down blockade on their data.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, and I want to hear your take on this. Was Willis Moore just blinded by pure, unadulterated ego, or was there an actual protocol he thought he was following?
It's a great question.
Because suppressing life-saving weather data out of pure jealousy seems almost cartoonishly villainous.
It does sound like a movie villain, but it's actually a complex, really toxic mix of both professional jealousy and a deeply misguided paternalism.
Paternalism? How so?
Well, on one hand, Moore's ego absolutely could not tolerate the idea that a foreign entity, one he deemed less sophisticated simply because it wasn't American, was out forecasting his own heavily funded bureau.
Right, the classic nationalistic pride.
Exactly. He viewed the U.S. Weather Bureau as the premier scientific institution in the world. But on the other hand, there was a systemic institutional fear of causing panic.
Oh, the idea that the public can't handle the truth.
Precisely. You have to remember the U.S. Weather Bureau had recently been placed under the Department of Agriculture.
Oh, agriculture,
Right.
not public safety.
Oh, right. They viewed weather forecasting largely as a tool to protect crops and commerce. They believed that issuing a false alarm, causing people to panic and disrupting the flow of capital was somehow a worse sin than failing to warn of a potential threat.
That is a staggering calculation to make.
It is. They genuinely thought they were managing public psychology and protecting the economy. In reality, they were managing people straight into their graves.
And the extent of this management is just staggering when you dig into the sources. Moore actually enforced a policy forbidding the use of the word hurricane without direct, explicit authorization from his office in Washington.
Let's just pause and really think about the mechanical implications of that for a second.
Okay.
The very word designed to convey the specific catastrophic nature of the threat was banned. It was literally censored by the government.
Unbelievable.
Local forecasters like Isaac Klein down in Galveston were not allowed to look at a storm and call it what it was.
It's like smelling smoke in a crowded theater. But the manager has forbidden the ushers from yelling fire unless the CEO in another state signs a piece of paper.
That's a perfect analogy.
So instead of a blaring alarm, you get a polite tap on the shoulder, which is exactly what Galveston got. Because of this suppression, because the Cuban warnings were aggressively blocked from the telegraph wires and the word hurricane was outlawed, the official forecast given to Galveston was criminally understated.
The official forecast from Washington for Galveston, Texas, on the eve of the disaster, told residents to expect merely pleasant weather with increasing winds.
Pleasant weather with increasing winds. I cannot get over that.
It's chilling.
While a Category 4 monster is turning in the Gulf, gathering strength, zeroing in on their 9-foot sandbar, they are being told to expect a breezy, pleasant day.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the broader lesson here is absolute and unforgiving. When you filter scientific reality through the lens of nationalism, bureaucratic ego, and economic optics, the truth gets entirely stripped of its urgency.
It becomes useless.
Worse than useless, it becomes dangerous. An entire nation's early warning system was deliberately hobbled. It was pointing the wrong way, arguing about jurisdiction and terminology, while a catastrophe barreled toward the coast.
It's infuriating to read about. Because it means the disaster wasn't just a failure of a seawall that didn't exist. It was a failure of the invisible walls that are supposed to protect us. The walls of communication, of scientific integrity, of institutional responsibility.
Yes, all of them.
They all collapsed long before the first drop of rain even hit Galveston.
Which brings us to the terrifying physical reality of what happens when those invisible walls fail. The transition from the quiet, bureaucratic silencing in Washington to the deafening physical roar of the storm making landfall on September 8th is profound.
It's a violent shift.
The people of Galveston went from reading a forecast of pleasant weather over their morning coffee to facing an unimaginable scale of violence by nightfall.
Let's break down the sheer terrifying statistics of what actually hit them, because the numbers defy comprehension for anyone who hasn't lived through it. We are talking about a Category 4 storm. The winds were howling between 130 and 140 miles per hour.
And to really understand what that means, we have to stop thinking of wind as just moving air.
Right.
At 130 to 140 miles per hour, wind becomes a solid object, becomes a kinetic weapon.
Wow. A kinetic weapon.
The aerodynamic forces at that speed create immense pressure differentials. It doesn't just push against a house, it creates a vacuum above the roof that literally lifts the roof off the structure.
It just pops it off.
Exactly. And it turns ordinary debris like a piece of slate roofing, a wooden plank, a shattered window pane into lethal projectiles moving at the speed of a bullet.
Yeah.
It makes it physically impossible to stand, let alone walk or coordinate any kind of last-minute evacuation.
They're just pinned down. But as horrific as the wind wasn't what killed most of the city. It was the water that served as the true executioner, the storm surge.
Exactly. The water is almost always the primary killing mechanism of a hurricane.
And I want to really dig into this because the terrifying math of the surge is what haunts me. The sources detail a storm surge of over 15 feet deep, rolling right over an island whose highest point was 9 feet.
Yeah.
Can you explain exactly why a storm surge happens? Because it's not just a big wave, right?
No, it's not a wave at all. A wave is a surface phenomenon. A storm surge is a massive dome of ocean water.
A dome.
Yes. It happens for two main reasons.
Right.
First, cyclonic winds of the hurricane act like a massive plow, physically pushing millions of tons of seawater forward and piling it up against the coastline.
Okay, that makes sense.
Second, the extreme low barometric pressure inside the eye of the hurricane acts almost like a vacuum, literally sucking the surface of the ocean upward.
Wait, the low pressure actually pulls the ocean into the air?
It literally lifts the sea level underneath the storm. So as the storm moves onto the shallow continental shelf of the Gulf, this massive dome of water has nowhere to go but up and inland.
So you have this dome of water, 15 feet high, hitting a sandbar that is, at most, 9 feet high.
It is a simple, brutal equation of total submersion. There was literally nowhere on the island to stand that was above the waterline. The sea simply reclaimed the sandbar. It erased the geography entirely.
I want you to really picture this as you're listening right now, because we hear 15 feet of water, and we might think of a really deep swimming pool or maybe a flooded street where cars are bobbing around.
Right, a flooded basement.
Yeah, but it's not just water filling your basement. It's the ocean swallowing the roof of your house. It is a sheer wall of crushing, dark, debris-filled ocean moving with momentum of a freight train.
And that momentum is key. The structural integrity of a late 19th century city never stood a chance against the sheer weight of the ocean.
No.
Water weighs about 62.4 pounds per cubic foot. When a 15-foot wall of it hits a wooden Victorian home, the house doesn't just flood, it shatters.
It explodes, basically.
Yes, and as the water rose, it turned the destroyed buildings into battering rams. A house would collapse, and its massive timber framing would be caught in the churning surge, smashing into the next house down the block, knocking it off its foundation, adding its timber to the moving wall of wreckage. It was a grinding, churning machine of destruction, pushing across the entire island.
So block by block, the city simply ceased to exist.
Doubled.
And the human toll is just, it's a number that is incredibly hard to hold in your head. Roughly 3,600 buildings were completely pulverized, wiped off the map as if they were never there. And the death toll. The historical records show the estimates range wildly because so many people simply vanished.
They were swept miles out into the Gulf of Mexico, or they were buried under mountains of debris so thick they were never found.
Yeah.
The estimates range from 6,000 to 12,000 people.
Which is why the uncertainty itself is a core part of the tragedy. But the commonly cited accepted number by historians is 8,000 dead on the island alone. 8,000 dead. That was roughly a fifth of everyone who lived there. Imagine that. 1 out of every 5 people in your city, your friends, your neighbors, the people you buy groceries from, gone overnight.
It's unfathomable.
We really need to emphasize this fact because it is the core premise of our deep dive. This remains, to this day, the deadliest natural disaster in United States history.
It is a scale of loss that dwarfs events that are far more prominent in our cultural memory. I mean, it is more than 4 times the death toll of Hurricane Katrina.
Wow.
It is more than double the death toll of the infamous 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Yet, if you ask the average person on the street to name the deadliest disaster in American history, very few will say Galveston.
It's astounding that an event of this magnitude can slip through the cracks of our collective memory like that. But, hearing 8,000 dead is almost abstract. The human brain struggles to process a statistic that large.
It just becomes a number.
Right. To really understand the horror of that night, we have to move from the incomprehensible statistics down to the intimate, agonizing story of one family. We have to go back to Isaac Klein, the man who said it couldn't happen.
Because fate, or irony, or just the brutal mathematics of the storm placed him at the absolute center of the nightmare he helped facilitate.
Right. So let's go there. It's the evening of September 8th. The water is rising fast. The wind is tearing the slate roofs off the mansions, and the people of Galveston are panicking. The pleasant weather forecast is clearly a deadly lie. And where do they go? Dozens of them flock to Isaac Klein's house.
It makes perfect psychological sense if you think about it.
Does it? Why?
Well, his home was considered one of the strongest on the block, built sturdily to withstand heavy weather. But more than that, he was the chief meteorologist. He was the man who knew.
Ah, the authority figure.
Right. Around 50 terrified neighbors abandoned their own flooding homes and crowded into his house, seeking shelter, seeking the protection of the scientific authority who had assured them in the newspaper that they were fundamentally safe.
Put yourself inside that house for a second. The deafening roar outside. You literally have to scream at the top of your lungs to the person next to you just to be heard over the wind. The water is creeping higher and higher up the stairs, and you have 50 people huddled together, looking to Isaac Klein for reassurance.
They're clinging to the hope that his 1891 promise that a storm wave was impossible still held some weight.
But the ocean didn't care about his credentials.
No, and it didn't care about his newspaper articles. As the surge peaked, the immense hydrodynamic pressure against the structure was simply too much. The sources describe this horrifying moment. It wasn't a slow collapse. It was a literal trapdoor opening beneath them.
Oh my God.
The house, the supposed safest house in town, was torn completely off its foundation by the wall of the sea.
It didn't just flood, it capsized.
Exactly. It broke apart and plunged 50 people instantly into the raging, churning, dark water.
And this is where the story becomes a pure, agonizing fight for survival. Isaac Klein is thrown into the black water. He goes under. He loses his pregnant wife, Cora. She is swept away in the wreckage and drowns.
That's heartbreaking.
Klein and his brother, Joseph, somehow manage to surface. They find a raft of floating wreckage, part of a roof, or a wall, in the pitch black.
And miraculously, they managed to save the 3 children between them. They pull the kids onto this floating debris, and then they spend hours drifting in the absolute darkness, battered by 130-mile-per-hour winds.
Think about the psychological horror of that. Here is a man of science, a man of profound confidence, desperately holding his youngest daughter above the exact waters he had publicly sworn could never rise.
Right.
Every time lightning flashes, he sees the bodies of his neighbors, the bodies of the city he promised would never be harmed, floating past him in the wreckage.
What's fascinating here is the total devastating collapse of ego. I mean, every instrument he trusted, every theory he believed in, every ounce of his professional authority is completely obliterated in the dark.
It's all gone.
He is surviving the apocalypse of his own making, in a sense. Not that he caused the storm, obviously, but he built the complacency, he provided the intellectual cover that kept those people, including his own wife, in its path.
Yeah.
The cognitive dissonance of being the expert on a raft of wreckage must have been mind-breaking.
So what does a person do after that? What does a city do? How does a human psyche or a municipal infrastructure survive a night like that? When the sun comes up on the morning of September 9th, 1900, the wind finally dies down and the water recedes.
And what's left is unimaginable.
What is left is a graveyard. 8,000 bodies and 3,600 pulverized buildings. The smell, the heat, the sheer scale of the debris, it is apocalyptic.
Which transitions us to the aftermath.
Because the story of Galveston does not end with the storm. The response of the survivors is one of the most staggering, defiant chapters in American engineering history.
They didn't just give up.
No, they didn't just bury their dead, pack up, and abandon the island. They refused to die. They didn't just rebuild the houses, they actually waged war on their own geography. They looked at the sandbar that had betrayed them and decided to fix the planet itself by brute force.
They recognized that the hubris of ignoring the danger had failed. So they swung to the absolute opposite extreme, acknowledging the danger and engineering a monumental defense against it.
They finally decided to build the seawall.
Yes.
But we aren't just talking about a little retaining wall here. Let's dig into the mechanics of this because it's incredible.
It was a massive wall of solid concrete, 17 feet high and 10 miles long, curving along the Gulf Coast to act as a shield.
10 miles long.
Yeah. They drove massive timber pilings deep into the sand, poured tons of concrete, and designed the face of the wall with a concave curve.
Why concave?
So that when a massive wave hit it, the energy of the wave would be deflected upward and back out to sea rather than slamming directly into the city.
That is brilliant.
It's an incredible piece of engineering.
But the wall wasn't even the craziest part. They realized that a 17-foot wall alone wasn't enough if the city behind it was still sitting in a 4-foot deep bowl.
Right, because of the rain.
Exactly. Rainwater would pool, and if water ever did breach the wall, the city would become a giant bathtub. So they made a decision that sounds like science fiction for the year 1904. They decided to physically raise the entire elevation of the island.
They literally changed the topography of the earth beneath their feet. They decided to slope the entire city upward toward the new seawall.
How do you even start doing that? Let's really get into the details here because this blew my mind when we were reading the sources. They took the existing buildings, the hundreds of homes and churches that had survived or the new ones they were building, and they lifted them up into the air.
Using hand-cranked jack screws.
Yes, hand-cranked, like jacking up a car, but for a whole cathedral. They would put massive timbers under a house, and a crew of men would turn these jack screws a quarter inch at a time. Slowly, agonizingly, they lifted houses, commercial buildings, even the massive St. Patrick's Church, up onto stilts, sometimes 8 to 10 feet in the air.
And then came the dredges.
Right.
This is where the engineering gets truly wild. They brought in massive hopper dredges, huge ships designed to suck up the ocean floor. They steamed out into the Gulf of Mexico, sucked up millions of cubic yards of sand and salt water into their hulls, and then steamed back toward the island.
And to get the sand into the city, they actually dug a massive canal right down the middle of Galveston. They essentially bisected their own city so these massive ships could sail inland.
Wow.
Then the ships hooked up to massive pipes and discharged this slurry, a mixture of water and sand, directly underneath the elevated buildings.
The water would eventually drain away or evaporate, leaving a thick layer of fresh sand behind. Slowly, inch by inch, block by block, the ground level of the city rose.
It was an undertaking of immense physical labor and incredible spatial coordination.
It really was.
So what does this all mean for the people living there? I was trying to think of how to describe this experience for the residents. It wasn't like jacking up a car in a garage. It was more like trying to inflate an air mattress while someone is still sleeping on it.
That's a funny way to put it, but it's accurate.
The residents didn't leave. They lived in these houses suspended on stilts, while slurry and ocean sand were actively pumped underneath them to create a new ground level. They walked on elevated plank sidewalks for years.
It is a testament to an almost terrifying level of human resilience. I mean, it took years. The salt crust, the smell of the dredged ocean floor, the constant noise. But they did it.
They really did.
It is the ultimate counter-argument to the hubris that caused the disaster. Instead of pretending the ocean wasn't a threat, they acknowledged the threat with profound respect and engineered a monumental physical defense against it. They learned the lesson in the hardest, most agonizing way possible, but they learned it.
And we know they learned it because history provided the ultimate validation, the final exam, so to speak. In 1915, 15 years after the Great Storm, a comparable hurricane struck Galveston.
Almost identical.
Similar intensity, similar path, similar massive storm surge.
And the engineering held.
It worked?
It worked perfectly.
Yeah.
The concave seawall took the brunt of the kinetic force, throwing the waves back upon themselves, and the raised elevation prevented the catastrophic submersion of the city behind the wall.
Wow.
The 1915 storm was severe, obviously property was damaged, but the death toll was a tiny, tiny fraction of the 1900 disaster. A few hundred lives instead of 8,000. The city survived. The physical defense worked.
And it wasn't just physical engineering that changed. The 1900 disaster forced American meteorology to grow up.
Yeah.
The U.S. Weather Bureau had to face a massive, undeniable public reckoning.
They absolutely did. They could no longer hide behind their paternalism or their nationalism.
Yeah.
The blood of 8,000 people basically washed away the arrogance of Willis Moore's information blockade.
Right.
The Bureau was forced to take warnings seriously, to communicate threats clearly without censoring words like hurricane, and, crucially, to respect and integrate foreign scientific expertise like the Cuban models.
Institutional growth is almost always paid for in blood. The modern National Weather Service, with its absolute emphasis on worst-case scenarios, clear, unambiguous warnings, and international data sharing, was fundamentally shaped by the catastrophic failure at Galveston.
Exactly. So we know the concrete seawall held up to history. We know the institutions reformed themselves. But what about the legacy of Isaac Klein himself? Because the way history remembers him, the way the story of his survival was written, it's complicated.
Very complicated. This brings us to the historiography of the disaster. How is this story written, and more importantly, who gets to write it?
This is where the narrative takes a very sharp, very modern turn regarding the nature of truth. Because for generations, the story of Isaac Klein that was passed down in Texas was not a story of scientific hubris.
No, it wasn't.
It was a story of redemption and heroism.
Right. The myth. The legend of the hero of Galveston. If you read the old accounts, the story goes that Isaac Klein, the heroic forecaster, realized his terrible mistake at the last minute as the barometer plummeted.
The dramatic realization.
Exactly. The legend says he broke protocol, defied his bosses in Washington, hitched up a horse-drawn cart, and valiantly rode up and down the beach in the final, desperate hours before the storm hit.
Yelling at everyone to leave.
Yeah. The story claims he was screaming at people to flee, personally warning as many citizens as he could, saving thousands of lives before returning to his own home just as it was destroyed.
It's a deeply satisfying narrative arc. It's cinematic. The arrogant scientist who sees the error of his ways, risks his own life in the pounding surf, and achieves redemption through selfless action.
It's a Hollywood movie.
It provides a neat, digestible hero to an otherwise relentlessly grim, senseless story.
But then modern historians start digging. Specifically, Eric Larson, who wrote the definitive book on this. He starts digging into the actual meteorological records, the survivor diaries, the telegraph logs, and he finds a very honest, very uncomfortable twist.
There is absolutely no evidence the beach ride ever happened.
None. Despite this pervasive legend of a frantic ride down the beach to warn the masses, there are no historical records, and more importantly, no eyewitness accounts of anyone actually seeing Isaac Klein make this ride.
Not a single one.
In a city of thousands of survivors, no one recalled a man in a cart yelling about the storm.
This raises an important question about who gets to write history and why they write it the way they do. If the beach ride didn't happen, where did the story come from?
It had to come from somewhere.
Historians strongly suggest that this heroic narrative was likely a story Klein helped cultivate about himself after the fact.
Wow, let's pause on that. A survivor, quietly editing his own role in a disaster he failed to foresee.
We really have to consider his psychological state. Put yourself in his mind in the weeks after the storm. The man lost his pregnant wife. He lost his city. He lost his professional dignity.
He lost everything.
The crushing weight of the guilt must have been absolute. He was the man who said the seawall was an absurd delusion. To live with the reality that his arrogance contributed to the deaths of 8,000 people, including the woman he loved. The human mind often cannot bear that kind of psychological weight without fracturing.
So he constructs a coping mechanism.
Yes, he constructs a narrative where he did everything he could. A narrative where he was the hero at the 11th hour, shouting into the wind, doing his duty.
To save his sanity.
It was likely a lie he told himself so often that he eventually believed it, just to be able to wake up in the morning.
And because he survived, and because he remained an authority figure in the Weather Bureau for decades after, his version of events became the official history. He wrote memoirs, he gave interviews, he shaped the memory.
He controlled the narrative.
It is a profound duality. On one hand, you have a catastrophe so vast, so deadly, that it should be globally unforgettable. Yet, outside of Texas, it is largely forgotten. And the one part of the story that is somewhat remembered, the hero's tale of Isaac Klein on his horse, is a narrative we can't even fully trust.
It really reveals the fragility of historical truth. History isn't just a ledger of what happened. It's a tapestry of what the survivors agree to repeat. In this case, the loudest voice shaping the narrative belonged to the man with the most to hide, or at least the most profound guilt to assuage.
That is so true. And it brings us right back to the present day. Because if you go to Galveston right now, today, the 10-mile concrete seawall is still there.
Still standing.
It is still holding back the Gulf of Mexico. You can walk on it, you can touch the concrete, you can see the elevated grade of the streets right behind it.
It is a massive physical reality that stands in stark contrast to the shifting, subjective sands of the historical narrative. The wall doesn't lie.
And when you look at that wall, you have to reflect on its true meaning. It is not just a monument to the storm. It's not just a marvel of 20th century engineering or a testament to the dredges that pumped the sand.
No, it's more than that.
That wall is a monument to the 8,000 lives it cost to learn a single, devastating lesson. It is a permanent 17-foot-high reminder that the phrase, "it can't happen here," is the most expensive sentence ever spoken by humanity.
It is concrete proof of our own vulnerability. We build our societies, our economies, and our daily routines on the assumption of absolute stability. We trust our technology and our institutions implicitly.
We really do.
But the earth, the ocean, and the climate are entirely indifferent to our assumptions. Galveston learned that through total annihilation.
Which leaves you, the listener, with a question I want you to mull over long after this deep dive ends. We look back at the people of 1900 Galveston and we shake our heads at their hubris. We marvel that an entire city of brilliant, wealthy people backed by the highest scientific authority of its day could be so blindly confident that the ground beneath their feet would never wash away.
Yeah.
But what absurd delusions of permanent safety are we living under right now simply because the water hasn't reached our doorstep yet?